We are so lucky to have Susan with us today. How are you, my friend?
Really well, thanks, Melissa. Really happy to be with you today.
I think I want to just jump in and ask, give us a little bit of your background, but specifically why you were attracted to this industry.
Mm. So through high school, I always wanted to be a doctor.
Okay.
Um, and I had a real interest in medicine, but I knew I wouldn't get the marks for it because the marks are so high. And I was okay with that. I was
Okay.
okay with that. And I really loved chemistry, and my chemistry teacher kind of showed me this new degree that was opening up at a university that wasn't, only a couple of hours from my home. And it was the first of its kind in Australia, and it was drug design. And I thought, wow, that's for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I always really liked problem solving, knowing how things work, but wasn't really ever exposed to engineering. And science was really about, how things worked, how the body worked, how nature worked, how things worked at the molecular level. So that's kind of what drew me into the science space. And then I did my undergraduate, I did a postgraduate degree, did some research. And then I kind of hit that similar wall that I guess many women in their sort of, mid-career or early 30s might hit when they decide they might want to have a family.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so hit some barriers, realized that actually, the way that I wanted to work was not sort of from contract to contract, jumping around different research projects, because that's kind of what you have to do if you don't have a grant that you've kind of achieved by yourself. If you don't have a permanent job, which in Australia, there's not a lot of pharmaceutical companies. So a lot of it's academic research, a lot of it's that sort of, short contract opportunity. So then I started looking at how I could use my skills and experience in a different way in a government role. And that took me into the defence space. And
Mm-hmm.
I really loved that space. It opened up a whole new world to me that I didn't know existed. And so this transition for me of going from a very lab focused, independent way of thinking, independent way of working, very tunnel visioned, I guess. I was really super focused on one thing in my research, to having to think about, well, what's the global strategic picture look like? How do I
Mm-hmm.
contribute to that? How does this little, piece of science that I'm working on contribute to that and make a change? And how do we create change on a global scale? And also to support, a national priorities. Yeah, so that was a whole new way of thinking for me. But what it showed me was that there are other opportunities to contribute with STEM skills. And I had whole teams of STEM people working with me and then for me. And it was really, really exciting time in my career.
I love that. Well, I love that you made the transition too, because
Yeah.
it's hard for anybody to adapt outside of their comfort zone. But I also, it's hard sometimes for me to ask the questions that seem so stereotypical. Like, when you were getting your education, were you one of the few women, or were you a lot, did you have a lot of women surrounding you in education? When it comes to your job, did you have a lot of other women with you? And then when you had to make the choice of family and adapting to a family, which is something that, especially if you're in an environment where, it is the woman seems to be the only one that is making that decision for herself. Again, these seems like stereotypical questions that I'd be asking back in 1986 or 96, but
Yeah.
it seems like here we still are. And again, that's one of the reasons we'll talk about this later, the importance of women in STEM leadership. But, do you mind answering those uh, what I think are antiquated questions? Were you somebody who was ahead of your time, or were you somebody who's like, oh, I'm in this whole plethora of women and it's not a big deal?
No, I definitely wasn't ahead of my time. And even though they might seem like antiquated and stereotypical questions, I think it's really important to keep asking them, because when I look back 20 years ago, where I was sort of 20, 25 years ago, what the situation was for me, it's the same situation that women are experiencing now, which is so
Hmm.
frustrating. So in my undergraduate, there were loads of women, lots and lots of women. because I did a real broad mix of chemistry, physiology, anatomy, physics, biology, biochemistry, so all the sciences. So some hard sciences had a few more women than men, but in my very specialized course, where there were only about 12 or 13 people, more than half were women. So I was definitely surrounded by plenty of women.
That's great. I just stop you there just to put a punctuation on that, because if anybody is watching who is either young enough to start their education or somebody who wants to transition into more STEM because they always wanted to do it as a woman but never felt comfortable doing it, I think it's important to realize women are flooding the education system for these type of jobs and type of education.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that it was the case back then, and it's still the case now, that in engineering undergraduate, women really are, in single digit groups within their courses. So that's kind of still a challenge. But for me at the time, that was fine. And when I moved into postgraduate, there was still plenty of women, but I hadn't cottoned on to these gender issues. So I hadn't actually realized that there were gender biases in the system. I grew up one of five, 4 girls and a boy. I was the eldest, and my parents always told me I could do whatever I wanted. So I never grew up with any gender bias awareness. It just wasn't in my, it wasn't in my experience. So I just, probably a little naively went on thinking that that's how the world operated, when in fact it really didn't. And so it wasn't really till I, kind of looked back in my early 30s that I noticed, well, I didn't really have many, I didn't have many role models at all. I didn't have many female lecturers in the sort of in my postgraduate space, so my PhD research, and then after that, my postdoc research. There weren't many women role models around, and I certainly didn't have a mentor. And I could see that the men around me were being sponsored, but it didn't seem like a big deal, because I thought, oh no, I just have to work hard. And I know I have to kind of connect with these people, so I'll just try and do it myself. So I tried to do everything myself. And I didn't realize that actually there's different ways of doing things, and how important networks were and how important mentors were. So I think that it's great that we focus on building that up in women in STEM now, because they're so important, being part of networks, having people around you that have similar goals and ambitions, that are women as well as men, but learning how to navigate the very masculine environment early, I think, is really important.
I remember what I was going to say when I was younger. I remember somebody bringing up, now times have changed because, there were plenty of women in sports, but there was an analogy that young men were playing sports and learning how to work as a team for the same goal, while girls were learning about doing their tea parties with their stuffed animals, right? And so this idea of women are isolated, again, to me, in my mind, antiquated comments. However, it still seems that we're kind of trained to sit and be perfect and be noticed, right? So if I do the hard work, then somebody's going to look at me and give me that promotion or give me that job or give me that grant, where it seems like, and I'm stereotyping, but men understand the benefit of groups, of being in kind of gangs and clusters. And, and how much of it do you think is a intentional actions of men to exclude women, or is it that they just go about their normal routine, and unless a woman speaks up, they just don't pay attention?
So I think it's the latter, Melissa. So, there's research, plenty of substantial research that, indicates that boys and girls are kind of socialized very differently. And the boys do socialize. They're taught to socialize in that group, and, having the loudest voice, because if you don't have the loudest voice, you can't lead the group. Whereas girls, like you said, we were taught to play with our tea parties and our stuffed animals, but we were taught to let everyone have their turn to listen and wait our turn to speak.
Right.
And so in the workplace, I don't think men do it intentionally. What I think, in addition to that, sort of the way that men, just implicitly grown up with this sort of, group approach to work, to life, to getting things done, there's also this sort of in-group, out-group effect. And so when men see women as not like them, which we're not in many ways, then we're not in their in-group. And so they don't often consider that we have the appropriate skills or knowledge or expertise that matches theirs, or that what we're saying might not be that useful. When in fact, it is very useful, and we bring different perspectives, and we absolutely have the same skill sets and expertise that they do. So I think there's still this very much implicit bias around women just, sitting in the out group. So there's lots of work to be done around pulling down those barriers and showing people that different perspectives are important, different experiences are important, and that women have value to add. And I know particularly in the technology space, so you're thinking IT, cyber, those sorts of technology spaces, women really can be the one person amongst 30 men in the team, and they really struggle with this. And the men don't think that that woman is as good as them at the technical skills, which of course is not true. But then of course, there's the opportunities that women get that kind of excluded from, again, not necessarily intentionally, but because they're not always seen or thought of, because they don't do that same sort of highlighting themselves in groups or that sort of informal group networking in the workplace that men do. Not all men, but many men do so well.
Well, I have a 7-year-old son, and I notice, he's a big gamer. So, and I'm a gamer too. So, I play games with him, which I think helped him understand that women play games too, because he was based on what he was watching, he was getting this idea that this is a guy thing. And to me, for a lot of guys, this is their introduction to technology, right?
Yeah.
And so they have this idea that it's all boys. Well, we kind of, rectified that, but then I noticed the commercials that are happening within the games themselves. There's a lot of times that it's the damsel in distress and the guy comes and saves her. And I've had several times to make comments to my son, and it's Pac-Man, it's Mario, it's certain games in Minecraft, and he's not paying attention to that. But I'm paying attention to the fact those are the consistent themes that he's being introduced to. So what that turns into for people who aren't thinking about it or aren't aware of it is exactly what you said. If he always sees himself in the rescuing role as a boy, then how is he ever going to have the respect of the girl to be his equal if she's constantly putting herself in trouble and he's constantly having to rescue her? And that to me is like a theme. And again, people may think that that's overanalyzing, but as you spoke that, I'm like, I am trying to save my son from these messages as much as I can, but I can only do what I see in my home. I mean, those messages are still out there.
Yeah, so look, I don't play games, I have to admit. My kids do, but they just don't interest me. And it's really disappointing to hear that that's still the case in 2022. I mean, there's no reason that games should be incorporating those types of really explicit gender biases.
Or at least switch it out. And that's what I would say to him. It's like, oh, well, sometimes Miss Pac-Man could save Pac-Man.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
But again, it goes, and we're going to end on a positive note, but I think it's just important, like you said, to have these conversations. I'm happy to ask these antiquated questions and to just be aware of these messages because they are subtle. We've heard that over and over again, but I think there's a way to change. Instead of banning video games, there's a way to change it. And the people that are developing these things, a lot of times are guys who in their minds, hey, this is cool for me to be the rescuer, but not understanding, hey, everybody can be the hero, not just the guy. So, but moving on to women in STEM leadership, this is, I would love your take on why you're involved and also how important is this organization for exactly what we're talking about?
Oh, yeah. Look, great question. So if I step back maybe 5 years, Melissa, if you don't mind,
Sure.
I had a bit of a pivotal moment in my career where I had I'd done a coaching qualification, so I had a whole new set of skills and a whole different way of being able to, help other people think about their problem sets. I was starting to get really quite frustrated by what I saw around me, which was that I had to really fight to get the leadership development that I wanted. And I was seeing the women around me that worked with me or for me, or even just, somewhere in my organization, really struggling with the biases they were experiencing, but struggling a lot with their own confidence and their ability to find their voice and know how to develop their leadership skills. And I had a particular instance, this was kind of like, a real pivotal moment for me, a particular instance of probably about 5 or 6 years ago, where I'd been building my career up to this particular job that I wanted in my organization. And so I'd had my eye on this job for 10 years. And so for the 10 years previously, I'd kind of built up all this experience. I'd taken particular jobs because I thought they would get me to the right place to be the right person for that job.
That is commitment.
And
I was gonna say
but I had a lot of fun on the way. Like, I
yeah.
mean, a lot of fun on the way.
But I love the fact
But
you had the goal, right?
yeah. But I had my interview, and my boss said to me, "You weren't the preferred candidate, and I don't think you'll ever be the preferred candidate." And I said, "Oh, why not?" I was interested. Because I'd compared myself to all the people, and I knew that I wouldn't be the preferred candidate, and I was okay with that. But to hear that I never would be, I thought, oh, I'm really off course here. What's going on? What am I not seeing? And he said to me, "You just don't have the influence piece." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" He said, "I just don't think you can influence at that level." And that's all I got from him. And I took that away, and I mulled over it for a couple of days. And I thought, right, I've got to go and learn how to do this better, influence better. But then as I started learning how to influence better, I did a whole range of things. I did an NLP course. I did a lot of reading. I kind of went back to basics of how do people influence. And then I started getting really interested in the neuroscience around influence. And I realized that actually there was a whole heap of women out there like me in the space I was working in, that was kind of this, STEM government transition, but also in the security, national security space, and in the STEM space, probably even were having a harder time with learning how to build these skills. So that's when I decided I wanted to take all the learning I'd done over the previous 20 years and start focusing on helping women develop their leadership skills. And I specifically focused on STEM, the STEM sector, but also the security sector, because that's where I was working, and started there. So for me, that's where my purpose and my passion lie.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see enough focus really on building, on seeing leadership development, tailored leadership development, as a really important, valuable option, an opportunity for women to help them navigate the barriers that exist in the STEM ecosystem, which we can't deny. Everybody knows they're there. Everybody's trying to do something about it. The real problem, of course, is the culture. And until the culture changes, the other things won't change. But of course, culture is really slow to change. So in the meantime, I wanted to be able to help women not just survive in these, environments, but really thrive, teach them how to communicate more effectively, teach them how to communicate science or technology information to a strategic audience, teach them how to influence and understand their own personal power and use that, how to build relationships more effectively, but how to build up the people around them so they could lead teams effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I moved into this space. And a lot of coaching goes at the foundation of the work I do, and a lot of learning about self, which is the most important thing to do as a leader.
You're walking the walk. I mean, that's the thing. You talked about how, mentorship was kind of lacking. And you had you took this experience. It was very disappointing, but you turned it into something. And I just find that so admirable and necessary, because I think sometimes for anybody, but here particularly for women, if things aren't going the way you want them to go, um, there's an opportunity there, right? Instead of it just being complete
Always.
disappointment, there's opportunity
Yeah,
there. So, you
always
know,
an opportunity.
yeah, is there a way that people can get in touch with you if they have specific questions, or do you have advice on how women can find mentors? And for me, it's not just about women who can find mentors at a young age, but let's say someone is pivoting their careers. I mean, what is your advice on getting that mentorship so that you can, feel like you're not alone and that you're on the right path?
Oh, absolutely. Look, there's lots of different types of mentors. They can be people that you touch base with regularly. It could be somebody that you work maybe with, but maybe someone that's outside your work organization in a different field. It could be someone that you just see every now and again when you have a problem that you'd like some help with. So mentors, I guess I really want people to understand that mentors come in all different shapes and sizes, and there's no set hard fast rule about what a mentor should look like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, mentorship is a relationship. So the mentor and the mentee both give to that relationship, and they both get out of it as well. So the mentee, the mentor will get value out of the relationship from the mentee as well. I think that's really important to keep in mind. I think it's really important for people when they're looking for a mentor to understand what they want from that mentor. So just, sending out a blanket intention, I want a mentor, won't get them the mentor they want or need. So be really clear about the goals that you want to achieve and how a mentor can help you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then using your networks, so whether that be family and friends, whether it be colleagues in the workplace or a manager, to help them find that right person for you.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And I think
and you mentioned network too. So just if you don't have the network you want, this is a good opportunity to start building that network as well.
absolutely, mentors can be really important people in your network. If you don't yet have a network, then I'd really encourage people to start building a network, by looking out for people who they have some common ground with, that they could learn from, that they think there's value in having a relationship with. Now, your network you don't have to hang out with all the time. I mean, you'll have your network of people, your day-to-day network of people that you hang out with all the time in the workplace or in your personal life, and that's really important. And that's often a real source of support and ideas and assistance. But having what's called a strategic network is also really important.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know someone in another organization that does something similar to you, great, catch up with them, get in touch with them, start building a relationship. But the idea of having a network is that it gives you access to different perspectives and ideas, different resources. It can often give you access to mentors, just to people who are experiencing similar situations to you as well.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it's another layer of support, of knowledge, and also access into perhaps another industry or another organization.
Mm-hmm.
And people who utilize their networks can often use them to get their next job, for example.
Exactly. Yes, that's
Yeah.
my biggest advice to my son is not necessarily, I mean, of course the education's important, but don't burn bridges along the way because
Yeah,
I mean, you never know. But I also think that, women in STEM leadership is also a resource for people as well. And, Susan, before we
absolutely.
go, and I thank you so much for sharing all that before we go. Is there anything that you would tell a woman who may had, kind of trip up on this interview, who is not in STEM, and maybe it's a different transition for her based on her, education or her background? Like, why would you encourage women to enter the STEM arena?
Mm, that's a really good question. Look, I think it comes down to interests. What are your interests, and what sort of environment, what do you want to be contributing to your workplace, but to society, I guess. And so that transition later in life can be more difficult. But if you're interested in something, if you've got a passion about something, if you feel like it's your purpose, then you absolutely must follow it.
Mhm.
And build yourself up with support around you. So other women, other like-minded women, mentors, networks. Now, in that transition space, I know that because the cybersecurity industry is quite young and has kind of had to grow from nothing, what I've noticed in Australia, and I think this goes for globally, is that a lot of women who are in the cybersecurity industry have transitioned from other industries that aren't even related to IT, which is
Mhm.
fantastic. And what they tell me they love about it is the challenge, the meaningful work, the people that they get to work with,
Mhm.
and that their job's different every day, and they get to use so many of their skill sets from previous careers.
Right.
So I know that the cyber industry does support that transition quite well, because there's training. There's a lot of training there to help people transition. But other engineering or maths or medicine or health sciences or science even, there's opportunities there. I just think you've got to follow your heart, and if you're interested in it, then all the experience that you have from your previous careers is going to be so beneficial
Right.
to a STEM career. And look, very soon we're going to find, I mean, STEM touches pretty much everything that we
Mhm.
do in our everyday lives
Right.
already. Most industries have a STEM component in them. So if someone's in a health industry, for example, or even an education industry, and they're interested in STEM, they can probably transition within their industry to a STEM related function and get the training along the way. They've got the support mechanisms, they sort of know the field, so they're using the knowledge they already have. That'll
Mhm.
probably give them a more substantial foundation to work from, and a sense of comfort as well, so they don't feel like they're jumping completely into the unknown.
Right. Well,
Um,
I tell a friend of mine who has done work uh, mostly on the computer, mostly with computer systems, piecemealing things and puzzles together. And then she'll say that she's not a techie at all. And I try to remind her, well, of course you are. I mean, like, and
yeah,
so I think for a lot of women, like you said, have confidence to understand that you bring a lot to the table.
LinkedIn.
And that's awesome. Susan, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.